He's an eminent sociologist, very well known, and he teaches. He taught at the. He teaches at the university, Punjabi University in Patiala, and has held a number of administrative positions as well.
First of all, I want to express my gratitude to the department and Madam Anjali Roy, Shivaria, and Ritika, and all the organizers. I hope you're hearing my voice.
Yes, sir, it's audible.
Okay. So we can start with write about this book which I wrote about. This is called, name is One Drama. I think it may be visible. It's in Punjabi basically, and a book of poetry. And though I'm a sociologist and I'm not poet as such, that so first of all I would like to explain that why I wrote this book, why particularly in poetry and in Punjabi. Actually, I belong to a small village named Kurd. Kurd means small. I was born almost 7 years after the partition, and almost 40% of my village was houses were empty, almost broken, and we were playing as a young child. We would go there, but they were almost leftovers, and village in the center of the village was basically almost fearsome to us. And there were a lot of stories about the people, those who left the village, their fields. Some of them, they planted their trees, particularly the mango tree was associated with one person, Fakiria Gujar. So in the universe of the village, there was their absence, basically, which was part of the universe of the village. People would remember about them, talk about them, and when this happened, the year was called Halyawala Saal, the year of attacks. My mother told me that I was born 7 years after the Halyawala Saal, and this was a time marker. The events were counted that before so many, 2 years before Halyawala Saal, 3 years after Halyawala Saal. So it was very, very important event in the consciousness of the village. Even in the surrounding villages, there was a village. Some people from Chung came there as refugees and they fought with those people. There were no number of stories. So somewhere in my mind, this was that why it happened, how it happened. And later on, I became activist in the student union and later on became professor of sociology. I always wanted to basically know that what exactly happened and why it happened. Almost 50% of our relatives were either they went there in the bars to cultivate the lands and they came back, and all of them have their own stories. So still last year I went to Pakistan. Wherever you go, you will find almost in every family there is story associated with the partition. I wanted to conduct some research. I almost encouraged many students, but nobody took it that seriously. And later on, I thought that I should write about it. I read the history, Professor Ahmed's, and all the accounts, all the Khushwant Singh, Manto, all literature about that. And I started writing, took notes of that. But one day, my mother-in-law, she was staying with us. She was victim of partition. She just questioned me casually that you will write it, that who will read it. So I thought that I will write it in English. There may be some seminar or some critical reviews or something like that, as it happens with other partition books. So those who have suffered, they may not access this thing. So I thought that I should write in Punjabi. And in the meantime, we organized a seminar on one of the themes, that was the pre-colonial Punjabi consciousness, along with PRG and many other books. People came from outside also. I read a paper over there on Jangnama that was by Shah Muhammad. Basically, Jangnama is an account of Anglo-Sikh wars, and it is the last book before the occupation of Punjab. It was the last, we can say, pre-colonial book as such. So when I studied that, analyzed that, I found that there is a lot of difference between about the consciousness of the people, Punjabi consciousness, before the coming of the British, before the annexation or occupation of Punjab, and after that. So, but I thought that I should write in Punjabi, and I entitled it Vandnama, on the pattern of Shah Muhammad's Jangnama. Nama basically means account or narrative. As a form, or as a, we can say, etymologically, we can find out it was earlier Ferdowsi wrote, basically, the Persian poet, Shahnama. So from there, number of namas, accounts are there. Zindagi Nama, you can find. Yesterday, just I was looking at Lahore Nama, for instance. So I entitled it as Vandnama, that the account or the narrative of Vand. While I was writing, basically, it became a almost some sort of revelation to me, that one day I wrote in Beth Chand a few of the lines and recited to my mother-in-law. She said that this is the way that it should be written. So I wrote, I'm not as such poet, but it is a long poem, almost 111 stanzas and 25 parts. So the book was basically well received. Then we transcribed it in Urdu also, sent to Pakistan also. So still it is going on. But the main thing which I wanted to discuss, if I would have written the book academically for an academic audience, the issue was that why, for instance, people regress into such things, and what is the core issue in it? Is it the partition is basically as an event, it has happened and closed? I found that there is no closure. It is, the process is still continuous. And how it started, why it is continuing still, we are almost, we have partitioned minds, and why we are always go into that type of, we can say, divisions, that type of clashes, barring few people, most of the people, they regress back into that. We can say identity politics, we can say communalism, we can say whatever it is. So first of all, I try to find out that what is about the issue of identity, because the earlier, particularly North India, has been ruled by outsiders. They came, but there were no communal flare-ups. People were not participating in that. They would come, and there were Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and others. There was no issue of religion as such. It was issue of power. Those who have power, for instance, if one chief of the village or the tribe has converted to the religion, that was okay, no problem. But common people were not affected by those rulers, or it was not that deep, we can say. So what changed with the coming of Britishers? Earlier, people, those who were living in these areas, they were basically, their lives were organized. Their power, society was organized on the basis of largely cultural identities. But the English people, when they came, they tried to find out or tried to manipulate or try to substitute, we can say, the cultural identity with the religious identities. And why they did it, for instance, they had their own reasons for that, and they have their own limitations also. First of all, let me say a few words about the identity. Usually we find that from identity cards that such person is like that, gender, age, or something like that. But all the persons always as myself, we carry an identity kit. We have not a singular identity. There are many identities. I'm, for instance, professionally, I'm professor, academically, I'm sociologist, caste-wise, I may be Jat, religion-wise, I may be Sikh, or language or culture-wise, I may be Punjabi. Now, if you look at, for instance, I can convert into Muslim, into Hindu, into Sikh, into Buddhist, into Christian, but I cannot convert myself into Gujarati, into Bengali, into anything. So, cultural identity is more deeper. It's more, we can say, unifying. It's more, we can say, deeply conditioning. So, what happened when the Britishers came? They found a lot of languages, a lot of diversity, but they could not adjust with that idea of diversity because they were obsessed with, we can say, what we call the classifications, the system, the control. It was in their culture because they came from just one type of, we can say, culture, one type of race, one church, one state. They have not seen such a diversity, first of all. Second thing was that they were more obsessed with system and control. Still, their culture is like that. As Voltaire, I suppose, said that it's a nation of shopkeepers. So they were shopkeeping in a way and make very neat classifications, neat categories, and because that was very good for administering the people. Wherever they went, for instance, social anthropology was basically used for this in Africa and everywhere. They studied the people, they tried to find out, and they were obsessed with this idea that they are superiors. And others, all diverse, and these confusing categories are sign of inferiority. Second thing was that they were experimenting with this thing that how to put people against each other. For instance, in Bengal, it was just for administrative convenience. They partitioned, but the cultural identity of Bengal, we know that it asserted it. So when this happened in 1947, they were very weak after Second World War, and they never wanted to go. Basically, what Professor Ahmed was beautifully portraying that thing. They deliberately created a zone, unstable zone, for instance. This so-called, we can say, Commonwealth was just to perpetuate their intact rule over here. And they never wanted to leave because they could not hold, that's why they have to leave. And it was a very, 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 very devilish type of, we can say, conspiracy. Number of books has been written about Holocaust and the things. Nobody has taken it like that seriously. That who is responsible ultimately? It was their state. They did it deliberately. And they put the people against each other. And it started very early, for instance. They found that they can divide on the basis of religious identity. And neatly they created, for instance, first census in 1881. They asked this question to the people that who are you? Earlier there were multiplicity of identities. People were not divided like this. For instance, all the Pirs, all the Sufis, all the Sikh saints, number of people. If you look at the history, number of people have died for Guru Gobind Singh, fighting against the Mughals. They were Muslims. So there was no question of that type. This question came first, that you define yourself as a Muslim, as a Hindu, as a Sikh. Second thing started with the education and with the favors. Some old professor told me, who taught in Pakistan, in Lahore, for instance, they created the post of Punjabi and they told that we will give the post of Punjabi to a Sikh professor and post of Urdu to a Muslim and post of, we can say, lectureship of Hindi to a Hindu. So it was very clear to them. They were not in doubt that how to put people and how to create new elites, for instance. So our educated elite, for instance, if you look at the all movements, Arya Samaj, Ahmadiyya movement, even Singh Sabha movement in Punjab, they were basically of educated elite. They wanted to be acceptable to the Britishers. Most of them, if you study their literature, early literature, the so-called reformist, they were just addressing to them and making their religions, their traditions acceptable to the British rulers. So they were getting benefits, there was competition about that. And then in 1935, they experimented with it. The limited elections, we can say, were held, and that constituency politics started. And our elites, they found it very convenient to mobilize and to organize the people on the basis of these identities. That's why suddenly Muslim League became powerful, and most of the secular people like Ijna, they went to that side. So I was basically looking at this, that how this identity, individual identity as well as collective identity, why it becomes so powerful at such times. And you totally leave your individual identity, your individual choices don't matter at all. Second thing was that why our elites could not resist this thing. For instance, there would have been a federation of South Asia on the basis of cultural identities. And they found ultimately when the idea of two-nation theory or three-nation theory was basically dependent on this thing that religion is basis of nation, and that nation is basis of state. If there are two nations, there should be two states. And both these two states, we know that they faced the language issue first of all, even in India, in Andhra, everywhere, when Hindi was, they try to impose, even till date, if you try to impose Hindi, you will face that there is no one India. And same thing is in Pakistan, for instance. If it was, for instance, religion was the basis of the nation and basis of the state, Bangladesh basically undid it. It became a non-sustainable idea because Punjabi and Bengali, as a cultural identities, they could not stand, they could not stay together because it was not possible. So there is no question of religion between Bangladesh and Pakistan. So religious identity was not basic as far as living is concerned. Still, it is not. It may be good for organizing the people, mobilizing the people, using the people, but religion is very, very limited as far as culture, language, geography, traditions, everything is concerned. For instance, even till date, Punjabi Hindu has nothing common with the Tamilian Hindu and vice versa. And they are not convertible to each other. So this diversity was very good, it was powerful, and because Congress was organizing entirely at a different level, so British they wanted that should be demolished, unity should be demolished, and people should be organized on this basis against each other. So they turned skillfully the differences into contradictions. Differences are always welcome, they are always there, they will remain there. Because once you start using differences as contradictions, state becomes very, very powerful, very, very manipulative, very, very degenerate, and citizens suffer. So this process is still, we can say, continuing. Because they had classificatory, we can say, confusion, and there was another problem for the Britishers in comparison to other rulers, for instance. The issue was their numerical strength, their language, their different race, and they had no legitimacy. For instance, Islamic rulers and others, there were so many common things with the earlier invaders. These people, they came, and because they were suffering because of the legitimacy, so what they did was that they said that our rule will be rule of law. This idea first they brought it. Earlier, all the rulers, all the legitimacy was seeking on the basis of kinship. That your relationship, your son of the king, your daughter of the king, your, we can say, brother of the king. So they said that no, this is a personal rule, this is rule of the king, but our rule will be rule of law. So we will make law, constitution, everybody will be equal before that. And second thing, they had in mind, and we can say they were preaching also that this is white man's burden, for instance. Legitimacy was that we are forming the whole planet, whole mankind, because these are underdeveloped tribal people and we are the superior. But they were suffering from another complex also. They could not find, for instance, there was church, state, and they have very limited civilizational experience. Here there were religions, for instance, without God. There was a religion, Buddhism, Jainism, and others. They could not conceptually understand it. So what they did, they wanted to put all the people into state-made pigeonholes, we can say. There was lot of we can say controversy, protest was there, but ultimately state can do what it want to do. So what happened in 1947? That suddenly the people till March in Punjab, there was Unionist Party. People were together. Suddenly things started going that way. And earlier there was basically date was June 1948 for the division. So one cannot, nobody, the simple political knowledge or understanding, one cannot believe it, that they could not see it. It would have been done in a different manner. Population would have been transferred earlier. But they did it deliberately. They created a situation, particularly for the local elites, that they were marginalized. All the leaders, like even Gandhi was marginalized in that thing, that the flare up was very, very deliberate. All the criminals, all the other people were used. Professor M beautifully explained that thing. But when I was writing this book, when I was going through all these things, one question was always in my background of my mind. It was troubling me that why people suddenly start killing each other, and why they have not killed any white people, any of the rulers. Why the helpless poor people, those who were migrating, why the women, why the children, why the old people? When I wrote this book, wherever this book reached, almost for more than 6 months, almost every day I have been receiving some sort of phone call or others. People would start telling their stories, how they came, how some people died in the way, so how they resettled. Number of things. So still they are going on. Still, number of books are being written, archives, interviews. There's a lot of pain. But still, because Punjabis as such are not very good at academics or not very, we can say, urban community as such, compare it with the Holocaust, for instance. Look at the huge amount of museums, archives, films, even the storage of that, the artifacts and the pain and dealing with that pain and humanizing out of that. So my mind was basically always into this, that why it happens and how we forget, or we pretend to forget that as if nothing has happened. So in my own relatives, in my own friends, in my own circles, wherever I went, I had seen that there is some sort of psychological dislocation in all the people, not in the same generation. The younger generation, third, fourth generation, still they are not normal. There is depression, aggression, there are a lot of stories. Their behavior patterns more violent, more, we can say, prone to, or we can say, vulnerable to the drugs use and so many things. So I was trying to locate and try to understand that why it happens and how it happens and why we become victim of that. So then I try to search out that when we carry the identities, the identity kit which we are carrying, they are not just one thing. In different context, we invoke a different identity. And most of the collective identities, there is individual identity, for instance, there are collective identities, for instance, when you are referring to your community, caste, cultural group, whatever it is. those collective identities, or when they are organized into group, crowd, mob, they become herd, for instance. And they are intellectually, all these collective identities or collective groups are intellectually relatively very inferior, and they are very different. When you are in a crowd, you are a different person. And when you are out of crowd as individual, you are rational, you are good, calculating, reasonable, human. But when you are there, either you can be very, very, for instance, motivated by very, very superior sentiments, you can sacrifice for country or other things, but largely in smaller situations, when communities are put against each other, then there is a problem that they behave like almost like a monster. So this monstrosity of the identities, collective identities, it is within us. It's not that the person who is just killing another person. Actually, we participate in it. So unless until we look at ourselves from this point of view, that where it is residing in our minds and why it is we can say embedded or we can say lodged over there, and it comes out. And after it, as a pain body, for instance, as individual case also, when we are angry, we use different words, we use different actions, we can hit anyone. And when that anger recedes, can we repeat the same thing? So, in the same way, groups behave in that manner. What happened in this area, particularly in all of South Asia, we can say that these identities, monstrosity of the identities was invoked and used time and again. British used it, and later on, our political elites they accepted it as a set pattern, even in Pakistan, even in India. So that's why partition is not a one event. It has not been closed. It's not just a closure of that thing. So what happens that insecurity, fear, aggression in the minds of the groups is being used by the state. It may be in elections, it may be at smaller scale, it may be at a larger scale. So we can see, for instance, 1984, this thing was invoked, and out of 542 seats, Congress got 411 seats. So this is the thing that as a normal citizen, as a neutral citizen, as a normal person, I never see that this is within me also. And I am some way responsible for it. Why this level of consciousness, or unconscious we can say, why it is still living within us as groups, as we can say, citizens. I dealt with this question that the state, when it starts using uh, identities to legitimize itself, state becomes degenerated. It may be we can say the facade may be very democratic and other things, and elections played very important role in it. The United Congress, all the people, look at the national leadership, for instance, of that time. When they selected candidates, there was a lot of problem. In a Muslim area, in a Hindu area, in a Sikh area, you will select that candidate who can win. Because elections, mobilization for elections has its a different type of game rules. So all the people, those who were at the hands of affair at them, they were searching constituencies. Despite all the respect to all these national leaders, they were always in search of some permanent constituency, and they were addressing that. It may be Nehru, Jinnah, Gandhi, even Ambedkar. They were doing it because they were into this game that who will rule and how we will rule. So then came this constitution, this institutionalism, for instance. But the core of our society is not democratic. When we say that the democracy is a form of government of the people, for the people, by the people, which people? we never look at this question that what's the level of the consciousness of people and who is making the people, how society is reproducing itself, how much we are spending on the social reproduction of our citizens. For instance, how much we are spending on the education, on the health, and the human development of the mother. So we can see all the states, for instance, Kerala, where they are spending on the women, it is best in literacy and education, and in many other things. So state has left it, and state basically through the electoral system, these leaders, our leaders are electoral leaders, they are not that way leaders. So they motivate the people, they mobilize the people on the lines which are very easy. So communalism as a we can say form of mobilization, as a form of we can say uh, discrimination, it has very good returns and very less investment. Otherwise, it cannot survive. Nobody wants it. Nobody preaches it. Not in the schools. No, it is being preached at somewhere, but it has nothing to do with that because it has political and financial returns in all these countries of South Asia, not in India, not in Pakistan only. So this type of state as an institution, when it uses the or when it degenerates the citizens and uses that part of citizens, their identities, which can be used against each other, which can become violent and give protection to that. So partitions will continue. Still, partition is living in the minds of people in the form of fear, in the form of insecurity. So what I wrote in book in the last stanzas, that the inner partitions, the conceptual, the mental, emotional partitions are basically more important. We have never dealt with this issue. We have cried out of pain because it was unbearable pain. Millions of the million people were killed, million people were displaced. Still, they are not, they are trying to come to terms with it. Some of them may be successful, but largely the inner world of the people was divided, partitioned, and still states at small scale also, at large scale also, they are using it. And nobody is looking from this point of view. Nobody is looking at themselves. That why we are responding to these things. Why we are being forced to do that. Because our own identity consciousness, for instance, is not totally, we are not totally conscious about the type of identities we are carrying. I have seen in 1984 the people, those who were leftist, and Golden Temple was attacked. Just they slept as leftist, and in the morning they woke up as Sikhs. So Sikh identity became very important, and many of them were justifying almost everything because they were different persons, because the different type of identity was invoked among them. So this is when the state, when the politicians, when the elites deliberately use these things for perpetuating their power, for controlling the political resources. So partition will be there. So it may be technical thing that you divide or not. For instance, if we question ourselves, for instance, the Muslims, Punjabis on this side, they lost many things. But in Pakistan, they say that they gained something out of partition. They gained their country. The dream was sold to them that they will be happy. It will be a pure land, Pakistan. It could not survive. Bengalis, they found that it's not Pak. It's Napak. And they demanded another country and they got it, for instance. It may be technical issues apart. Pakistan, when they got, are they happy in Pakistan? But the dream was sold to them. Was it true? And in Bangladesh, they thought that we will rule ourselves, our lives. We will be the master of our lives. Are they master of their own lives? Is there no problem? So the question is that normal citizen is being manipulated and used unless until normal citizens become more conscious and they look at themselves that how they are being used, and that conscious unity will remove this type of manipulation, this type of partitions. So that's why I always say that outer partitions are basically reflection of inner partitions. And our elites, maybe political, maybe corporate elites, maybe cultural elites, they are unaware largely. It's not some of them criminally may be using it, but largely they are unconscious people. They are leader of our unconscious. They are not conscious leaders. They are not representing our best part. They are representing our worst parts. So that is the problem. That's why there was partition and still partition is going on somewhere always. So I think we should finish it over here. If there are any questions, so I'm available. Thank you so much for listening to me.
So thank you once again, Professor
Yes,
Bhatti, for
thank you
this
so much.
very wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
I'm very sorry for the link. I could not introduce you properly in the beginning, but I hope
Thank you so much.
you don't need an introduction. Your lecture itself was an introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I can't see everyone's names, but I can see Kapoor Saab, I can see Hina, I can see a lot of friends, and I can see a lot of students from our department, a lot of students from other departments, and faculty from all over India. Thank you very much for joining us.